I see it as an attack, really, a sort of covert, sneaky attack on Cuba. I think that the governments, all of them that in recent memory, have wanted to destroy the Cuban people, really, and their insistence on their freedom and their dignity. And I think this is a way of saying that, you have a, quote, terrorist there, and we have a right to go in and get her. And so this could cause a very big fight between these countries, which have never had peace in my life.
Before Tupac became a legend, his godmother was already America's most wanted, a revolutionary who flipped the system the bird and lived to tell the tale. She just passed away in Cuba at 78, but her final words about Tupac, they hit different, because what she revealed about who really killed him changes everything we thought we knew. The OG connection that built hip-hop's most authentic voice just lost a real one. 2025 will go down as the year the streets mourned another icon, Assata Shakur, the sister whose name has echoed through hoods and courtrooms for nearly 5 decades. She took her last breath in Havana, Cuba, on September 25th at 78 years old, free, unbent, unbroken. Still the same fearless revolutionary the feds could never cage, no matter how hard they tried. But this story ain't just about Assata's death. It's about bloodline, legacy, and the kind of spiritual bond that raised one of the most raw and powerful voices in hip-hop. Assata Shakur wasn't just a name you skim past in a Black History Month post. She was Tupac Shakur's godmother, his family, his foundation. Their connection ran so deep it was almost cosmic, a thread of rebellion, power, and truth that shaped the man who became a martyr for his generation. Let's rewind the tape back to the very start. Assata Shakur came into this world as Joanne Deborah Byron on July 16, 1947 in Queens, New York, the same borough that would later give us Nas, 50 Cent, and a whole army of lyrical assassins. But from day one, life had her in a chokehold. Her parents split when she was just 3, and little Joanne bounced between the tough streets of New York and the segregated dirt roads of North Carolina, where racism wasn't just an attitude, it was the law of the land. You could taste it in the air and feel it in the stairs. Money was tight, mad tight, and the struggle had her running away more times than she could count, searching for something real in a world that kept trying to box her in. Everything changed when she moved in with her aunt, Evelyn A. Williams, a civil rights worker who put her on game. Aunt Evelyn helped her get that GED, taught her discipline, and sparked that fire that would eventually set the system ablaze. Picture it, a young, sharp, no-nonsense Black woman walking through the halls of Borough of Manhattan Community College and City College of New York in the 1960s. The country was on fire, Malcolm was preaching, the Panthers were rising, and the system was finally starting to crack under the pressure of its own lies. Assata dove headfirst into activism, organizing sit-ins, marching for justice, and demanding real representation for Black students and faculty. In 1967, she caught her first arrest during a sit-in at BMCC, but instead of breaking her, that moment transformed her. It was the spark that lit a revolution inside her soul. That was when Joanne Deborah Byron shed her old identity and became Assata Olugbala Shakur. She who struggles for the people, and the thankful one. That name wasn't just a label, it was a mission, a declaration to fight for her people till her last breath. By 1970, Assata had joined the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party, drawn in by that bold 10-point program that wasn't just talk, it was action. The Panthers were feeding kids before school, running free health clinics, and educating the hood about self-defense and empowerment. Assata moved out to Oakland, the heart of the movement, where she helped organize protests, educate the people, and bring structure to chaos. But Assata wasn't done. She came back to New York to run the Harlem chapter, and that's when her legend really took root. She launched programs that fed thousands of children and gave medical care to families who couldn't even afford aspirin. This wasn't some photo op activism. This was real work, sweat and tears in the streets, feeding bellies, healing bodies, and opening minds one block at a time. Still, not everything inside the Panther ranks was peace and unity. Assata started seeing cracks, the toxic masculinity, the ego trips, the internal politics that turned passion into power struggles. It was like watching your favorite rap group fall apart, but this time, lives were on the line. In February 1971, it all exploded. Eldridge Cleaver called out Huey Newton on live TV, accusing him of selling out the revolution. Huey clapped back, and just like that, Cleaver was booted out. But the fallout was bloody. 4 members ended up dead, and hundreds of Panthers walked away from the organization altogether. And if that wasn't enough chaos, the FBI was behind the scenes pulling strings like evil puppeteers. Their infamous COINTELPRO operation was sending fake letters, spreading lies, and planting distrust, turning brothers against brothers, sisters against sisters against sisters, until the movement that once terrified the establishment started tearing itself apart from the inside. That's the world Assata Shakur was fighting through, a battlefield of betrayal, power, and revolution. And through it all, she never folded.
Imprisoned, I was shot with my hands in the air. I was accused of a wide variety of crimes, all of which, with the exception of the murder of a New Jersey state trooper, I was acquitted. I was tried for the murder of a New Jersey state trooper by an all-white jury in a highly prejudiced county where something like 70% of those polled already had.
She stood her ground, holding tight to her purpose. The same fire she later passed on to her godson, Tupac Shakur, whose own war with the system echoed hers in every lyric, every bar, every tear. Because what Assata lived, Tupac rapped. And when she finally spoke her truth about his death, she didn't just mourn her godson. She hinted that the system they both fought might have had its hand in taking him out. Out of all that chaos, smoke, and betrayal, a new beast was born, the Black Liberation Army, the Panthers' younger, wilder cousins who weren't here for peace talks or empty speeches. These were East Coast soldiers tired of begging the system for justice. They wanted action. Inspired by guerrilla fighters from Vietnam, Algeria, and all over the world, they studied real war tactics. Discipline, ambushes, and strategy straight out the revolution playbook. By 1971, Assata had left the Black Panthers behind and linked up with the BLA, ready to take the fight from protests to power moves. No more waiting for justice. They were going to demand it, by any means necessary. And while all that was going down, another key chapter in this story was just beginning. On June 16, 1971, in East Harlem, New York, a baby boy took his first breath under the name Lesane Parish Crooks. But this wasn't just any baby. This was destiny wrapped in a blanket. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a fearless Black Panther who had literally fought the U.S. government while pregnant, beating a federal case in the Panther 21 trial. Can you imagine carrying life and fighting for freedom at the same time? That's revolutionary blood right there. Then came the twist. Afeni married Mutulu Shakur in 1975, and this man wasn't just any street cat. Mutulu was Assata's blood brother, a doctor and acupuncturist out here treating addicts in Harlem while secretly working within the BLA network. That marriage made Assata Shakur both Tupac's step-aunt and his godmother, a title she took seriously. She wasn't the type to just drop off birthday gifts. She was shaping minds and planting seeds of rebellion. The baby once called Lesane Parish Crooks was reborn under a name that screamed destiny, Tupac Amaru Shakur, named after the legendary Incan revolutionary Tupac Amaru II. That name meant something. It was a mission, a burden, a prophecy. You don't name your kid after a warrior and expect him to play it safe. From the moment he could understand words, Little Pac was surrounded by tales of Black Panthers, underground soldiers, and government raids. His bedtime stories were about resistance, not fairy tales. The Shakur family was a living blueprint for survival and defiance. In a 1991 interview with Davy D, Pac proudly said, "Mutulu Shakur is my stepfather. Assata Shakur is my auntie." You know what I'm saying? I come from a rich line of Panthers and straight revolutionaries. That wasn't just bragging, that was truth. Tupac was raised in the shadow of revolution. As a kid, he wrote poetry for imprisoned Panthers, pouring all that pain, pride, and pressure into his words. His education wasn't from textbooks. It was from dinner table conversations about FBI surveillance, betrayal, and the price of freedom. The streets were his classroom, and Assata's story was his first lesson in how far the system would go to silence a black voice. But fate wasn't done testing them. On May 2nd, 1973, Assata and 2 BLA members were driving down the New Jersey Turnpike when cops pulled them over, supposedly for a busted taillight. What happened next would go down as one of the most infamous shootouts in American history. Shots rang out, chaos erupted. When the smoke cleared, one trooper named Werner Forster was dead, one Panther was killed, and Assata lay bleeding, shot twice. She later said she'd been hit with her hands up, and evidence backed her. There was no gunpowder residue on her hands, and medical experts testified her injuries made it physically impossible for her to fire a weapon. But none of that mattered. The system had already made up its mind. In 1977, an all-white jury hit her with a life sentence plus 33 years. They called it justice, but the streets called it what it really was, a legal lynching. The same system she had fought to expose was now making an example out of her. But if the system thought a cell could break her, they were dead wrong. Because on November 2nd, 1979, Assata Shakur became legendary. That night, 3 armed revolutionaries rolled up to Clinton Correctional Facility for Women disguised as regular visitors, calm, collected, and ready for war. Using fake IDs and heavy heat, including reportedly a stick of dynamite, they took guards hostage, moved smooth as ghosts, and pulled off one of the boldest prison breaks in U.S. history. Nobody got hurt. Not one person. They commandeered a prison van, drove across the yard like something straight out of Grand Theft Auto, and vanished into the night, switching to 2 getaway cars waiting nearby. The whole operation was funded by a $105,000 hit on a Brinks truck and a Bamberger's store robbery. Revolutionary financing, guerrilla style. And just like that, Assata Shakur disappeared, gone without a trace. No smoke, no sound, just gone. The woman who had been painted as the most dangerous black woman in America had slipped through the fingers of the U.S. government like mist. For the streets, she became a myth, the one who got away. For the feds, she was an embarrassment. And for a young Tupac, just 8 years old at the time, she became something greater than human. She was proof that even when the world tries to bury you, you can rise. That the system could never cage a spirit that refuses to bow. Tupac, Assata wasn't just his godmother. She was a living symbol that the fight never dies. Meanwhile, his stepfather Mutulu kept pushing the mission until he too was captured in 1986, accused of armed robbery and of helping Assata's escape. He was sentenced to 60 years, serving decades before finally getting released in 2022, only to pass away a year later in 2023. The Shakur legacy was built on struggle, blood, and courage, every generation paying the price for truth. And through it all, Little Pac was watching, learning, and absorbing that fire, the same fire that would one day make him the voice of a whole generation. Every revolution has a cost, and for the Shakur family, that price was heavy. Assata paid it in exile, Afeni paid it in sacrifice, and Tupac paid it in blood. After her daring escape, Assata laid low in Pittsburgh for almost a year, moving like a ghost in her own country. Then she slipped out to the Bahamas, where she kept her head down until she found the one place powerful enough to stand up to the U.S., Cuba. By 1984, she landed in Havana, where Fidel Castro personally granted her political asylum. He called her a victim of political persecution, straight up defying the American government. That single decision made her not just a fugitive, but a symbol in a global chess match between the US and Cuba that still echoes today. At that time, Tupac was only 13 years old, and even though he could never visit her, not with US travel bans and her fugitive status, that spiritual bond between them never broke. Afeni kept Assata's name alive in their home like gospel, passing down her story as if it were sacred scripture. Pac soaked it up. Every word, every lesson, every warning about how the system crushes black freedom fighters. And then Pac picked up the mic, and the world would never be the same again. His music wasn't just rap. It was testimony. It was prophecy. It was truth wrapped in rhythm and rage. On his 1991 debut album, Tupacalypse Now, he made it clear where he stood. On the outro of Words of Wisdom, Pac shouted out, "New African Panthers, America's Nightmare. Mutalu Shakur, America's Nightmare. Geronimo Pratt, America's Nightmare. Assata Shakur, America's Nightmare." That wasn't a coincidence. That was a declaration.
Absolutely convicted. I was sentenced to life, plus 30 years in prison, plus 30 years because I would not stand up for the judge. I spent 6.5 years in prison. 2 of those 6.5 years I spent in solitary confinement in men's prisons, which was against New Jersey law, but nevertheless, that's where I was sent, and that's where I spent 2.
Pac was claiming his lineage, repping his roots loud enough for the feds to hear. He was saying, "This is who raised me. This is where I come from. I'm cut from revolutionary cloth." The track itself was a war cry for Black unity and resistance, and Assata's name stood right next to icons like Malcolm X and Huey Newton. Pac wasn't just making music. He was reminding America that the same spirit that once terrified the government was now reborn in a young rapper with a mic instead of a rifle. But here's where things get deep. What did Assata really think about Tupac? Most people never heard it straight from her because, living in exile, her words were filtered through activists, letters, and underground channels. But there's one rare interview that breaks the silence, a real gem buried in the archives of the New African People's Organization, published after Pac's death in 1996. In this interview, conducted by Jihal La, Assata opened up, and what she said cuts deep. She said, "I love his music, even when I don't agree with what he's saying or the premises he's operating on. He was able to touch so much gut stuff that most people don't even recognize, much less have the ability to express." Let that marinate. A revolutionary who gave up her freedom, her country, and her family was giving her godson his flowers, even while admitting they didn't always see eye to eye. She called him a genius with immense talent, a soul who could articulate pain that others couldn't even name. But she didn't sugarcoat it either. Assata kept it real. She spoke on what she called that contradictory consciousness running through Pac's art. She saw the battle between the panther and the player, the freedom fighter versus the thug persona, that tension between empowerment and self-destruction, between revolution and revenge. Assata compared it to what she saw decades before with leaders like Huey Newton and Eldridge Cleaver. She said, "That contradictory consciousness you're talking about is all over the place. Unfortunately, it's nothing new. The mind-destroying machine works over time, getting us to crave power and money instead of justice." That line right there hits harder than any lyric, because she wasn't just talking about Pac, she was talking about all of us. And then she dropped the words that still haunt anyone who ever loved Tupac, her most emotional truth yet. Tupac was an exception. He was only 25 when he died, and one of the things that makes me sad is that there was no strong community of African revolutionaries to protect him and help educate him. Those who loved him did all they could, but they were competing with some very forceful, seductive, negative influences. Think about that. She wasn't just mourning his death. She was calling out the system, the streets, and even the movement itself for not protecting him. She saw how Pac's revolutionary roots were being drowned by fame, money, violence, and industry manipulation. Assata wasn't just talking about a man. She was talking about a lost generation. She was saying that even the strongest spirit can be broken when it's surrounded by poison disguised as success. And then came September 7th, 1996, the night everything shattered. Tupac hit up the Mike Tyson versus, Bruce Seldon fight at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas with Suge Knight, and the whole death row entourage. After the fight, around 8:45 p.m., they crossed paths with Orlando Anderson, a Southside Crip who had been accused of snatching a death row chain weeks earlier. Pac didn't hesitate. He jumped Anderson in the lobby, throwing hands like his life was a movie. The brawl was caught on MGM's security cameras, and a few hours later, it all came back to haunt him. At 11:15 p.m. on East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, a white Cadillac pulled up beside Suga's BMW, and someone in the back seat opened fire with a .40 caliber Glock. 4 bullets tore through Tupac's body, 2 in the chest, 1 in the arm, 1 in the thigh. Suge caught fragments but managed to drive them both to safety. Paramedics rushed Pac to University Medical Center, where doctors fought to keep him alive. He underwent 3 surgeries, including the removal of his right lung. They kept him sedated, fighting for every breath, but his body had taken too much. On September 13, 1996, at 4:03 p.m., Tupac Amaru Shakur, poet, revolutionary, son of a Panther, godson of Assata, died from respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. The boy who grew up hearing about freedom fighters and government plots became one more name on that same list of legends gone too soon. But for Assata, his death wasn't just tragedy, it was confirmation. 25 years old, gone way too soon. But the legacy, that will never die. When Assata Shakur heard the news of Tupac's death, she didn't just cry or crumble, she analyzed it like someone who'd spent her whole life outsmarting the same system that tried to erase her. In that rare interview, she dropped knowledge that hit harder than any headline. When asked if she believed government tactics like COINTELPRO had targeted Tupac, she didn't even hesitate. "It's a definite possibility," she said. "Divide and conquer is what the FBI does best. So yes, I believe the government encouraged this infighting. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out they set Tupac up more than once." She wasn't just talking wild, she knew the playbook, she'd lived it, and she connected it straight to Pac's music. I believe the political nature of some of his songs. Without having insider knowledge, I just generally assumed he was targeted by the government because of the political nature of his work. Assata wasn't out here peddling conspiracy theories. She was speaking from experience. She had receipts. COINTELPRO had already proven what the FBI was capable of. Infiltration, surveillance, false charges, psychological warfare, all aimed at destroying black leaders from the inside. So why would it be any different for a young black man with millions of fans, revolutionary roots, and a message too powerful to control? This wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. But here's the part that showed why Assata was so respected. She didn't stop at blaming the system. She held us accountable too. She said, "We need to learn from the tragedy. There's nothing we can do to bring Tupac back, but we can learn from his death. We need to create a world where the Tupacs of the world can grow and love, and not be afraid that some fool with a Glock is going to blow their brains out." That hit like truth wrapped in heartbreak. She was saying the revolution can't just be about fighting the oppressor, it's also about protecting our own. And when people tried to drag her into those wild Pac faked his death rumors that resurface every September, she shut that all the way down. She called that kind of talk distraction from the real issue, reminding people to focus on what actually mattered, the message, not the myth. The parallels between Assata and Tupac's lives are almost eerie. Both were under constant surveillance, both accused of crimes wrapped in politics, both painted as villains by the media, and both turned into global symbols of resistance. At one point, both names were sitting on the FBI's most wanted list. On May 2nd, 2013, exactly 40 years after the New Jersey Turnpike incident, the FBI added Assata Shakur to its most wanted terrorists list, making her the first woman in U.S. history to ever be labeled that way. They slapped a $2 million bounty on her head, half from the FBI, half from the state of New Jersey. The move sparked outrage. The Center for Constitutional Rights blasted it as a cynical attempt to inflame public opinion, saying the feds were recycling COINTELPRO tactics, using fear to rewrite history and pressure Cuba. Critics called it political theater, a desperate move to keep her name on the radar and test Cuba's loyalty. But Cuba didn't fold. They never do. The government stood firm and refused to hand her over, calling her a political refugee and protecting her like the legend she had become. While in Cuba, Assata didn't just fade into the background, she kept building. She worked as an English-language editor for Radio Havana, stayed active in social causes, and became a mentor to generations of activists around the world. Her words inspired movements from Black Lives Matter to community-led justice groups that still chant her name in protests. She even inspired an entire organization, Assata's Daughters, a youth group in Chicago dedicated to carrying her message forward. Her name became a movement, and her influence on hip-hop, unmatched. Artists from Common to Public Enemy, Tupac, Dead Prez, Nas, and even Jay-Z have all name-dropped or referenced her legacy in their lyrics. She was the blueprint for fearless rebellion. the reminder that real power doesn't come from fame or money, but from truth and purpose. Her story and Pac's story, they run parallel, like two flames lit from the same torch. Both were hunted, both were misunderstood, both told the truth when the world wasn't ready to hear it, and both left behind words that still echo through every verse, every protest, every raised fist. Assata once said in her autobiography, "I believe in living, I believe in the power of truth, and I believe in freedom." That's the same energy that lived in Tupac, and that still lives on through us. So yeah, Assata Shakur might have gone out on her own terms, free in Cuba, untouchable by the system that once branded her a terrorist. But her spirit? It's still here, woven into the culture, the music, and the message. And Tupac? He's still out there too, not in body, but in legacy. Every time someone speaks truth through a mic, challenges injustice, or fights to be heard, that's Tupac living on. That's Assata's teaching surviving the test of time. So if you made it this far, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, because this story ain't just history. It's a warning, a legacy, and a blueprint for revolution.